Well, I'm so honored and blessed to be here tonight and get to speak on behalf of these amazing coaches here. Thankful for the people that came tonight to support me. I have a table right here in the front with several wrestlers, parents of wrestlers. My wife is here, my wife Angie. We've been married for 21 years, and my youngest son Leighton is here. So I'd just like to spend a couple minutes talking about what FCA has done in my life. I started becoming involved in FCA a little bit when I was a middle school teacher. We would do about 1 or 2 huddles a year, so not much involvement. And then I became more involved when my son, my oldest son, when he was a freshman in high school, he wanted to go join FCA. So he went to FCA every week, and really my involvement was I drove him to and from. I don't know if he really wanted me to come in with him, but so I drove him to and from. We talked about what they talked about there. And some things I noticed about FCA, especially at the North, was that it wasn't just all athletes that were coming there. At our FCA at the North, I'm sure it's the same as several others. Even though it's Fellowship of Christian Athletes, there are several other students just looking for a place to belong. And how awesome of a place to belong to FCA. I mean, kids at that age looking somewhere to fit in, so many places to fit in high school, and to choose and pick FCA as their place to fit in. I thought that was kind of special. And then for the athletes that showed up, as I talked to Colton, oldest son, about what they were talking about, over and over again I heard about that the message was that your identity is in Christ, not your sport. So many athletes, I think, get caught up in their sport, and it's not a bad thing. The dedication and commitment to your sport, those are all good things. You get praise from coaches and from accolades and medals and trophies, and those are all great things. But as we all know, those things fade away. There's one day that will be the last day that you compete in your sport, and then what are you left with? And I remember talking to Colton about how that over and over again he kept hearing the message that our identity doesn't need to be in our sport, it needs to be in Christ, because that never fades away. So then some more personal just message about what FCA has done with me. So Colton was attending FCA his freshman year, and October, fall break had happened. He was invited on a hunting trip in Medford, Oklahoma with some friends. And he went on a hunting trip, and we just were hanging out at the house in Edmond. We live in Edmond, Oklahoma. Angie and Leighton and I, and we go to bed, and then I hear a knock on the door a little after midnight. I'm thinking, who could be knocking on the door after midnight? So I kind of slowly crept to the door, and I peeked out the window, and I remember seeing some guy in like a white jacket. I was thinking, he's knocking on my door. So instead of just opening the door, I kind of yelled out, who is it? And that's when I heard back from the other side of the door that it was Oklahoma Highway Patrol. So I looked out again, because at first I didn't see him, then I saw several officers kind of standing there, and they asked if they could come in. I opened the door, let them in, and they first just said, do you have a son named Colton Schneider? I said I did, so I let him in, asked me to put the dog up and have a seat. By that time, Angie and Leighton had woken up and kind of come out, wondering what the commotion was about. And that's when they let me know that Colton had died that night in an ATV accident. After hearing that, I don't know if I can recall much else, kind of what I felt at that moment. For several days and weeks, our life was kind of in a blur. We were surrounded by so many people that loved us. And that's really, I know the people around us as we got us through it, and our belief and our faith in God. But Colton was a great kid. He's an amazing son. He's a great athlete, a great wrestler. That year was his freshman year. It was actually going to be the first year that I would get to coach Colton. Growing up, I always let his Little League coaches and his junior high coaches coach him, because I was trying to keep the gap between being a dad and being a coach. And Colton and I had talked about it. It was getting ready to be the start of the season. We were prepared for it. We talked about what that would be like, me being his coach, and we were ready for it. Colton was a great brother. His little brother, Leighton was 10 at the time. He's now 14. Just that year, they had shared a room together. And just that year, Colton, he said he was in high school and wanted to have his own room. And so we kind of set up the 2 bedrooms apart. We had the boys sharing a room. And You know, Colton was excited to have his own room, Leighton was excited to have his own room, but then every morning we'd wake up and we would find that Leighton would have went down the hall after we put the boys to bed and climbed into bed with his older brother every single night. And it didn't bother Colton at all. I mean, he'd have his little brother jump in bed with him, and he, like I said, he was a great brother to him. He was a great friend. Some of his best friends are here tonight. You know, he is a kid that could talk to anyone. He would become friends with anyone. He had a goofy way of living. That's the way his brother describes it. He's kind of goofy. Wasn't shy about anything. Me getting up here and speaking to you all, I'll just tell you, I was nervous. It wouldn't have bothered Colton a bit. At his funeral, there were over 2,000 people there. And there were kids from other wrestling teams around the state that knew who he was. Teams loaded up buses to come to the memorial service of Colton. But most importantly, Colton was a believer in Christ. He had given his life to Christ just a couple years before he died. That's what gives us hope that we'll see him again one day. It's hard to say, but probably the most proud I've ever been to him actually was something that happened after Colton died. In our neighborhood, we have a neighborhood pond, and they did a candlelight vigil just a few days after Colton passed away. And after a short little service, they had all the kids had these little candles, these little plastic candles that kind of lit up when you put them in the water. And they asked everyone to turn their candle off, and then they gave an invitation to give your life to Christ. And they asked anyone that wanted to do that night to put their candle in the water, and they would light up in the dark. I was in tears during this time, and I wasn't even looking out, and my wife kind of tapped me on the shoulder. She's standing there by my side, and Angie said, look. And as I wiped away my tears, I could see there were over 100 candles in that pond that night. And she said, this is because of our son. Shortly after that, our FCA, who had been supporting us all the way through this, invited me to get to come speak about Colton. It was the first time I got to come talk about him. From then on, they asked me to be the sponsor for FCA, and now I'm the sponsor for FCA, so I've enjoyed being part of this organization. I've continued to to grow closer to God through the organization, but also I love knowing that I'm somewhere that Colton would have been. That's where Colton would have been. He was a member of FCA, he played the guitar, he was longing to be part of our worship team with FCA. So me getting to go every week and be part of our FCA, I'm sharing like a place where Colton would have been. Last thing I'd like to talk to you about FCA happened the day after Colton died. My best friend, who I hadn't really talked to in a while, showed up at our door, and he ended up hanging out and just coming over to our house every single day. Unfortunately, at the time, he was out of work. He had been let go from his job, and I look back now and how selfless he was at a time in his life when his family was suffering financially, and he could have been using all that time to be out searching for another job. He came to our house just supporting me and loving me through that time. When I went back to coaching, he came there with me. He volunteer coached, got paid nothing for it all year long, and volunteered that first year I went back to coaching. Again, looking back, knowing this was a time I knew his family was suffering financially and just a hard time for his family, and he just continued to selflessly encourage and love me and my family through that. And then last spring, toward the summer I guess, I remember getting a call from him, and I could tell the excitement in his voice. After praying over and over, finding not just a job, but the job, he said, I think I found the job he's been waiting for. And it was FCA. FCA had called, and there was a spot open. It was a dream job for him, I know. He went to the interview, got hired, and so all that time going through that and being there for our family, and now your dream job, I just want to thank Nate Gomez for what you've done for me, for my family, and now for FCA. Thank you very much.